for joining the second webinar from Center of Earthquake Science and Technology, PUI, Institut Teknologi Bandung ITB Indonesia. Today, more than 400 participants registered to these webinars. And let me invite Professor Sri Widiantoro for giving short welcoming remarks before we start to hear your presentations. Please, Pak Elik. I want to invite Pak Elik for giving the welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Irwan Melano, the moderator. A very good morning to you, Professor Hiro Kanamori. It's a great honor as well as a great pleasure to have you with us today to give a talk on a very important topic, tsunami, earthquakes, history, and recent developments. I believe that you are the right expert to deliver this talk, as you have made an indispensable contribution towards the understanding of tsunami earthquakes. Thank you very much for your kindness and willingness to enlighten us on this important subject. To all the participants, I see there are already hundreds of participants present in this Zoom meeting. Thank you for staying late tonight to listen to this important lecture from Professor Hiro Kanamori. As many of you know, Professor Kanamori is a very prominent geophysicist from Caltech who has made fundamental contributions to the understanding of earthquakes, including tsunami earthquakes and the tectonic processes that can cause such events. Professor Kanamori's talk is related to the commemoration of the Pangandaran tsunami in West Java that took place on July the 17th, 2006. Today marks the 14-year remembrance of the event. So, without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Kanamori to give his talk, giving the stage back to the moderator, Dr. Melano. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sriwiantoro.
Can you
we are
speak
very
up,
delighted
please?
to. Yes. Thank you, Professor Kanamori. And then I would like to invite all the participants to give a warm welcome to Professor Kanamori. Please, Professor Kanamori, time is yours.
So I can start now.
Yes, please.
Oh, okay, you can hear me.
Yes, clearly.
Okay, thank you very much for joining here this late night. Well, I first want to talk about the history of tsunami earthquake study. And as far as I am concerned, my work on tsunami earthquake started around 1970 when I first read the papers by Professor Iki, Imamura, and Omori. And they reported about the 1896 Sanriku earthquake. And they said this was very felt on the Sanriku coast. People were there towards afternoon. However, so they didn't pay much attention to it because shaking wasn't very strong. However, 30 minutes later, nearly 30-meter tsunami came to the beach and more than 22,000 people died. So it was a great tragedy in Japan. So I was very curious about why this apparently large earthquake wasn't felt very strongly. Unfortunately, around that time, there were many seismograms. So it was not very easy. First, I want to show you the run-up caused by this tsunami. And this is taken from Dr. Hattori's paper in 1967. and he plotted tsunami run-up along the coast like this one. So it went as large as 30 meters at a few places over nearly 200 to 300 kilometer stretch. So it is really a very large tsunami, and not as large as perhaps the one from 2004 Sumatra earthquake, but at least for the Japanese history, this was among the largest. And then, unfortunately, it was very difficult to study this one seismologically because there are not many good instruments, not many good seismograms. But fortunately, there was a very early instrument called gray minimum seismograph that is shown here. And it recorded this earthquake like this. It's very small. It's a very short period, a few seconds, not really much. At the same, and we don't even know what we are looking at, whether it's surface wave, body wave, or whatever. But this is the biggest wave we could see on the record. And fortunately, at the same location, this instrument recorded 1896 Riku earthquake in the same year. And this one we knew because this happened on shore. So this was about 7.5 earthquake. So if you compare this one with this one, it's very obvious that short period waves from the Sanriku earthquake were not very large. That's the reason why this wasn't felt. Then how come the tsunami was so large? And that was really the beginning of my interest. Okay, so first I looked at amplitude of this one, as well as tsunami and other data. And by the time I studied this one, there was another tsunami earthquake, 1946, Aleutian Island. So I plotted strength of the source at the source. These days we call the seismic moment. It's basically the strength of the earthquake at the source as a function of period. This is 5 seconds, this is 500 seconds. And the red symbols are for two tsunami earthquakes, 1896 and 1946. And blue one is for a regular earthquake that happened in 1933. So just by comparing the amplitude, it is very obvious that long period end, they are about the same. But that short period, around 5 seconds or so, tsunami Sanriku earthquake amplitude is more than 1 order of magnitude, or nearly 2 orders of magnitude smaller than that you'd expect from a regular earthquake. So this is a big disparity. And that's why we called tsunami earthquake. Unfortunately, of course, around this time, there was no really modern instrument, no computer. So this was very qualitative at that time. But it turned out recent studies basically indicate that this is essentially correct. A tsunami earthquake is very different from regular earthquake in that the amplitude at short period is an order of magnitude or even to 2 orders of magnitude smaller than that of regular earthquake. Okay, then we jumped nearly 50 years since 1896 to these days. There are a lot of details. Of course, many seismologists work very hard to really understand not only tsunami earthquakes, but also regular earthquakes. The reason why we could do that, seismic source theory had developed, and the computer became very powerful, instrumentation improved quite a bit, and also we have wonderful seismic networks in the world like this. The instrument is very good, and the earth is very well understood. By understood, I mean now, basically, for seismological research purposes, we can compute all the Green's functions for the Earth. That means wherever you have an earthquake, we can compute displacement at any place on the Earth very accurately because we understand the structure of the Earth and we do have computer power. So that's a big difference during this 50-year period. So by knowing the Green's functions, now we can compute ground motion displacement at any point on the Earth very quickly. So not only that, we can determine mechanism, we can determine magnitude, And we can determine source spectrum, the graph I showed you before, strength of the source as a function of time, period. And these things can be determined very quantitatively, accurately, but most importantly, for warning purposes, very rapidly. These days, if we have magnitude 7.5 or 8 or even larger earthquake, any place on the earth, we can determine these things in a matter of, say, 10 minutes, even faster. And that's the big difference between 1896 or 1970 and the present time. In 1970, when I did this study, it took a few years to do this one, even incompletely. Okay. Just to illustrate what we know about tsunami earthquake in terms of strength of the source and amplitude. I have already shown you for 1896. This is a modern example. Very recently, there was 7.4 earthquake near Oaxaca in Mexico, 2020 Oaxaca, this one, and 1992 Nicaragua earthquake. And I compared the amplitude of very long period wave. This is almost 700 to 1,000 second wave. This is 1,000 second. So if you look at long period wave, these two are of comparable size, scale is the same. However, if you look at 20-second wave, this is much smaller than that of 2020 Oaxaca earthquake, regular earthquake. If you go to a 5-second period like this one, this is almost invisible. On the other hand, Oaxaca earthquake showed very large amplitude. So this is essentially the same thing as we saw for 1896, with much more quantitatively and much broader seismic frequency band. So quantify these things, we use magnitude scale. Like very long periods, 1,000 seconds or so, we use MW. And at the intermediate period, we use surface wave magnitude, 20 seconds, MS. And short period is also important. Even if this is small, the smallness is actually very important. And we use magnitude scale like MB or some energy or some other parameter like phi. So these are the parameters that quantify the strength of the source at very short period. And so these three parameters are actually very important to quantitatively represent tsunami earthquakes. Okay, well, this is kind of familiar. You are very familiar with this thing. This is from Professor Jim Mori. When he went there, he took a picture, and 2006 Java tsunami earthquake. Today we are commemorating it. So the tsunami damage was very heavy with large tsunami like this one, but shaking was relatively minor. I don't know because I wasn't there. So, however, according to this picture, looks like shaking damage was relatively minor. That means amplitude at short period is small, amplitude at long period was very large. Okay, and I said the modern technology can determine the location and mechanism very well and very quickly. And all these tsunami earthquakes, at least most of them, happened at very shallow depths, like here, near the trench over here. And the most tsunami events are thrust earthquake like this one. So this is the important point. A regular big earthquake, main slip is here at slightly deeper portion. And this difference is very important. If it's very shallow, even if the event is smaller, it can produce bigger tsunami here. So to determine the depth, determine magnitude, and location mechanism are all important. And that now we can do in a matter of a few minutes. So this is a big progress in seismology. Because of that, now we can use seismology very effectively for hazard mitigation purposes. So first show you kind of reference spectrum. This is the same thing as showed before. This is seismic moment or strength of earthquake at long period. As magnitude gets bigger, it gets bigger as a function of period here. And at short period, the difference gets smaller, but the long period difference is very large. So the regular earthquakes follow this trend depending upon the magnitude, like this. So this red one is one of them, the standard moment rate spectrum, and blue one is the actual data for regular earthquake, not tsunami earthquake. As you can see, this reference curve represents the observed one reasonably well. There are some differences because the spectrum is different for different events. However, if you look at tsunami earthquakes, they are very different. This is a collection of 12 spectrum of 12 events, and these are regular big events like 2004 Sumatra, 2011 Tohoku Oki, 2010 Chile, and these are important tsunami earthquakes. 1994 Java, 1992 Nicaragua, 2010 Hawaii, and 2006 Java. That's kind of interesting. For Java, at a very short period, it's comparable to regular event. This is probably because Java event has very long duration. So even if amplitude was small, energy became very large. But anyhow, overall, the spectrum is very different. And this is another group. So if you really look at this one, if you look at the spectrum very quantitatively, the difference of tsunami earthquakes from regular earthquakes is very obvious and very clear. So the key is to determine this accurately, very quickly. That's the most important thing. Okay, I'm sure you know this one. This is the location of 1994 Java, right on the trench. And 1992 to Nicaragua, almost crossed the trench, and the Peruvian earthquake almost crossed the trench. Most big thrust events are slightly closer to the coast, right here. So the location is also important. And this is, I'm sure you are very familiar with. This is a 2006 Java, 1994 Java, and 2010. Okay, this is a Mentawai event here. So these are all tsunami earthquakes. They happened along the trench here. And this one, 1907, is a very interesting event. Of course, seismic data and tsunami data were incomplete. But just like 1896, by looking at all data, we can say that this is a very typical tsunami earthquake. By saying that, what I mean is, the starting event happened right here near Similu Island. So this one was felt very strongly on the island, but it generated a very large tsunami extending over nearly 1,000 kilometers or so, 900 kilometers, although the boundary is not very clear. But the tsunami was very large for the magnitude of this event. And this meant Hawaii, the event happened right here, and the slip was very close to the trench. And to compare this 1907 event with 2011 Tohoku event, this study was made before 2011 Tohoku earthquake. So if you compare this one, this is kind of interesting. This map is upside down. This is Sumatra, and the Similu Island is here. The event started here. This event is 7.5 or maybe 8. It's a large event, but not nearly as big as 9. However, the tsunami was very large like this one. And if you compare this with 2011, it's the same scale. It's very similar. Tohoku earthquake was triggered by this event 7.2, 2 days before, and that sort of triggered main shock here, and it produced this rupture along the trench. So in a way, it's very similar. So in a way, 1907 is very similar to 2011. So this was a very good event for us to learn how this kind of event can happen. Of course, we knew that in 2010, the event happened in 2011. So we couldn't make use of information very effectively, but at least we can now understand this large slip near the trench can be triggered by slip slightly at the larger depth over here. And this is another important point. So this 1907 was a very large event. There was a very interesting recent paper by Martin and others who looked into tsunami data very carefully, and also old paper by Newcomb and McCann was a very creative paper who noticed that this event is very unusual. So this kind of basic seismic study is actually very important to understand the process. Not necessarily we can predict event, but we can understand what kind of event we should expect, say, along the Sumatran Trench. Okay, to use this for monitoring and warning, I said rapid information is very useful. Usually, it takes some time for seismic waves to travel to the seismic station. This is one of the important seismograms from a very large event. And normally, in the past, we used waves like this one, surface waves, for determining the size of a seismic event. So this wave, 20-second wave, is not very fast. So it takes nearly 20 minutes from the origin time. So if you lose 20 minutes in time, it's not very useful for seismic warning, tsunami warning. You really have to issue warning in a matter of a few minutes to 10 minutes. However, fortunately, very long period wave, like this one, this is nearly 1,000 second wave, travel much faster. So if you can capture this wave and use it properly, you can determine the size of the event at the long period, and you can determine the mechanism very accurately, very quickly. This is only a matter of a few minutes from here to here. So this is why this use of this wave is so important for tsunami warning purposes. And this is also very recent. In old days, we couldn't quite use of this information, so we depended on this. That's the reason why tsunami warning couldn't be issued very rapidly. I mentioned about two magnitude, MW, long period magnitude, can be determined from here. And also this body wave information, which would tell you that the body wave is either large or small. And in the case of tsunami earthquake, this is very small compared with this one. And this can be also determined very quickly by using a parameter like MB. So by comparing MB and MW, you can tell whether the earthquake is a tsunami earthquake or regular earthquake. And this is also very important to know. Okay, first I want to show you how we can use this very long period, 1,000 second wave, for determining the seismic mechanism and seismic moment or size. This is an example for 2011 Tohoku earthquake. The event happened here, and as I said, it takes seismic waves some time to travel to a station. During that time, we can get information. And this travel station near Osaka, Abuyama, it takes only a few minutes to travel. The waveform at this station near Osaka is something like this one. So it's only 3 minutes or something. You can see this long period wave, so you know this is a big earthquake. And source duration is also about 2.5 minutes. It took 2.5 minutes for the Tohoku earthquake to rupture. So adding these two, it will probably need 5 minutes to really understand this whole process. You have to wait some time to really understand the whole process, and you need to understand some recording to really understand what happened. You add up, more or less, and it takes a few minutes. So it takes a few minutes too. But then by getting this information, as I mentioned before, the whole Earth is now monitored, and we can compute ground motion very quickly. So by using this information, you can determine the mechanism, a thrust mechanism in this case. So combining this one, in principle, you can make a reasonable warning about the size of tsunami to be expected along the Japanese coast. This is a basic principle, but this applies to regular earthquake. You are looking at only long period. Suppose if this is 7.5 or so, you may wonder whether this is really a big tsunami hazard or not, because some 7.5 wouldn't produce big tsunami. Then it's important to know whether this is a tsunami earthquake or not. In order to tell that, you need to look at the short period. If short period amplitude is small compared with long period, then you can say this is a tsunami earthquake. Then, as I said, there is a very distinct difference between regular earthquake and tsunami earthquake. This figure shows magnitude MB, the size of earthquake at short period. This is MW, the size of the earthquake at long period. So tsunami earthquake, as I said, size is bigger at long period compared with the size at short period. So all the points for tsunami earthquakes are down here compared with regular earthquake. So by looking at this one, or by measuring these two almost real time, you can immediately tell the event is a tsunami earthquake or not. So for monitoring tsunami earthquake, this is a very important information. There are a few new developments on this. Okay. This kind of practice has been around for many years. And this slide shows you evolution of the technology. This is a time since 1920 to 2020 here, okay? And this is a processing time. How much time it took to process seismic data to determine some parameters and issue warning. And for example, this is a Caltech. This information was provided by Dr. Haukson, and at Caltech in 1920 to 40, in order to determine or report an earthquake, it took nearly a long time, several hours or even several days. But this has been shortened. But right now, it can be done in a matter of few minutes. Okay, this red one, I'm sorry. So that few minutes, you can report an earthquake. However, in order to determine seismic moment tensor, the mechanism and size quantitatively, it takes a slightly more time. So this green trend. But in any case, in a matter of few minutes, now at Caltech, you can determine the size, mechanism, and everything, okay, and report to the public. And this is a JMA practice, and this is provided by Dr. Shiba. And it's same thing. A long time ago, it took some time, 10 minutes, 1 hour, around 1960. But now it can do about the same time in a few minutes. So seismic early warning system or tsunami warning system, if you extend it, it will get here. So maybe a few minutes is still limit. It's very difficult to do it in less than a few minutes because for seismic waves to travel to the station, it takes some time. Or shaking warning, if you measure shaking at the site, you can probably do it more quickly. In some cases, you can do it in a fraction of a second or a fraction of a minute here, shaking warning. So, but anyhow, this slide shows the evolution of this technology. So it's very promising for warning purposes. You can now provide very detailed, accurate information in a matter of a few minutes. And if you really want shaking only, you can do it even faster in a matter of few seconds. Of course, you have to combine this with the reporting system, training, evacuation system, and drill and everything. But at least technology is developing. That's important to know. Other methods for tsunami warnings are also available. A GPS is very powerful to determine the event. And the pressure gauge, this is more direct because you measure water wave directly. And the cable system is even more advanced. And it's more accurate, detailed. But still, it takes some time because you really have to look at the waves and the process. So a few minutes are kind of a limit. And the ocean bottom buoy system like this one is very useful. But if this is located very close to the source, it's essentially very powerful. You can directly measure the tsunami at the source. However, tsunami wave is rather slow. So if this is deployed some distance away from the source, it takes for some time tsunami to travel to the station. So you cannot get very quick information. So there is problem, but still combining these will give us very powerful way to issue warning. And tsunamis of landslide and volcanic origin and the impact origin must be also considered. This is a very serious matter. Okay, how do we do this one? And it's really not just a matter of science and technology. Scientists will develop technology and science. However, with scientists alone, you cannot use it very properly. So you have to use science effectively for hazard mitigation. So you work on government so that they can make all the important planning. In the way this is done in the US, Congress requests a scientific group to write a report. In this case, they requested National Academy of Sciences to write a report on tsunami warning and preparedness, and they published this book. And this is very useful. This includes assessment of tsunami risk, preparedness, education, detection, forecast, improve tsunami warnings, reliability, and sustainability of ocean operations. So these are all important. We have to work together. But in order to do that, you really need something other than science. I can talk about science, but it's very important to work with other groups to make it useful. And this information, it's 20 a bit old by now, but still useful. And I'm sure Indonesia must have similar thing. Okay, what are the difficulties? Of course, there are many difficulties, I must say. Firstly, most natural processes, especially earthquakes, have many elements. And as a process, it's a stochastic or chaotic process because it has so many factors. So you cannot really predict exactly how it happens. Only statistically, you can make some forecast or prediction regarding what kind of thing can happen, but it's very difficult to make it very specific. So accurate prediction on a time scale or a daily lifetime scale, like few minutes, few days, even few weeks, this is very difficult. You must realize this one. And also, it's good that it's very rare. We don't have it every day. However, unfortunately, since it's rare, we tend to forget. And when it happens, it has a grave consequence. So we shouldn't forget. And in particular, for near-field tsunami, like 2018, Sulawesi, very rapid response. So these are very difficult things. We can't expect it to very well right now. And then still you need to respond very quickly. So we need to prepare for the unexpected. This is a part of science. A comprehensive program, including science, technology, vulnerability, infrastructure, land use planning, education, evacuation drills. These are all very important, very necessary. And drills are particularly important. And the long-term preparedness is important, but you need to support it. And in order to support it, we need stable funding for long time, sustainability. How can you accomplish this one? I have some idea later. Okay, some issues. For very large regular earthquakes like 2004 Sumatra, 2011 Tohoku earthquake, probably we can make a few minute tsunami warning from combination of seismic GPS buoy. Eventually, if we work out this collaborative work. So we can improve the traditional method of warning, seismic GPS. So we keep working, but the technology will develop. So we really have to formulate how to use it. For tsunamis of landslide and volcanic origin, this is slightly more difficult because in case of earthquakes, we know exactly how it can happen in thrust faulting or where. But in case of landslide and volcanic origin, it's less certain. However, as I will show you for the recent 2018 Anak Krakatau, scientists worked very well to understand what's going to happen. For near-field tsunami, it's very difficult. You really have only a few minutes. So in that case, self-evacuation, seismic shaking may be the only way. If people feel something, they should evacuate. However, this may not work very well for tsunami earthquake, like 1896, it didn't work. In case of 2007 Sumatra earthquake, it was felt very strongly on the island because luckily there was an island in between the main Sumatra island and trench. So people were there very close to the epicenter, so they felt it. However, in case of Japan, there are no islands like that. So 1896 wasn't felt. So this didn't work. So this is another difficulty here. And for slow earthquake, 1896, 1992, so on, self-evacuation may not work. So really seismic warning is very important. And this is feasible, as I mentioned. It's really a few minutes to 10 minutes warning is certainly within our reach. Then how to handle property loss. This is very difficult because you may be able to save lives. That's of course very good, but to save property may be difficult because there are structures right there. What can we do? I think really there is some nationwide insurance coverage can be very important to handle this problem, deal with this problem. Let me talk about this new research on Anak Krakatoa 2018. I'm sure you are all familiar with this one. And I said, in case of volcanic origin, sometimes it's difficult because we very often don't know exactly what to expect. But in this case, this group, Dr. Giacetti group, did a very nice work prior to this event on the basis of geomorphology or structure of the volcano. And they said maybe this part may collapse and then produce some landslide with 0.28 cubic kilometer volume, which may cause large tsunami. And their prediction of tsunami was very accurate. So in this case, thanks to this group, we knew exactly what to expect. And when this happened, the slide happened right here in this way. And this kind of source has been understood very well through Mount St. Helens eruption, for example. It's a landslide, a part of the mountain slid down this way. And this can be modeled by a sliding block like this one. And if this slid like this one, it will exert force in this way, in the opposite direction to the ground. And it will produce some seismic wave. And when we looked at this record from BBJI, one of your stations, we noticed the north-south component is very large, but the east-west component is very small. That means radiation, this portion is small, large, but this one is small. That fits perfectly with the expectation of the seismic radiation from landslide like this one. I'm not going to talk about in detail. So if you make simple calculation using this model, you can produce waveforms like this one. So in this case, if you, even the single station would have told you that this could be a landslide type source with very large volume. And more recently, Professor Ye and others, we looked at, they looked at the W phase and at many of your stations here and could match the waveforms very well and obtained the fourth time history. This history tells you the landslide mass and direction and speed, and then came up with a volume of 0.2 cubic kilometer, which is very close to the prediction given by volcanologists. So this is still very preliminary in a way, but you have a nice network over here, and you can implement efficient seismic warning system, and with a lot of planning, organization, education, and drill, you can make good use of this kind of science for effective tsunami warning purposes. So the conclusion is this. First, science and technology, but we have really progressed quite a bit. Seismology, GPS, ocean bottom instrumentation, telemetry, they are steadily advancing. And now in some parts of the world, they are being effectively used for warning. And we can expand this program worldwide and make them more efficient. We can certainly contribute to tsunami warning and tsunami hazard mitigation. However, as mentioned several times, science alone may not be enough. We cannot do very well by themselves. We really have to coordinate efforts with the government people, practice people, and the people involved. So difficulty is the events are very rare and unexpected. We have to be very well prepared. We have to prepare for the unexpected. And sustainability, long-term funding is very difficult, as you may know. And so if you have a seismic network, for example, for monitoring purpose alone, since the events are very rare, it may be difficult to get funding for a long time. If nothing happens for 50 years, probably government is not willing to fund. If the network is used only for monitoring during a 50-year period, nothing. However, if the network is used for science, like general seismology, volcanology, everything, then it's a different story. The network is always used, so it's important to keep funding. So global network for seismology is a good example. It's a wonderful network, but it has been used for science. But at the same time, if we make good use of it, it's very powerful for warning. And that, for tsunami research, they change the way they do tsunami research. But if this is only for monitoring, this may be difficult. It may be very difficult to keep funding. And the vulnerability study is very important. What's going to happen? And land use planning, evacuation strategy, education, and drills. They are all so important. But it's very important to coordinate efforts with scientists. So close collaboration between scientists and engineers, practitioners, and the government officials. This is very important, again, to make everything effective. So that's basically what I can talk about right now. And thank you very much for staying up too late. I'm sure you're getting sleepy. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Kanamori. A very exciting talk. I still remember when the first time I heard your presentations that was 2007 when I was in Nagoya. I forget to mention in beginning of your talk that you received your PhD from the University of Tokyo in 1964, and now you are a California Institute of Technology emeritus professors, and you also Kyoto Prize honoree. And from your talk, maybe I can give several points. The first thing is you mentioned about the understanding of characteristic of the tsunami earthquakes. And also you explains that by using the first arrival of seismic wave, the long period wave can give warnings of the intensity of the earthquakes. And also by using a few seconds of lead time, the W phase magnitude may give warning as part of earthquake early warning systems and also tsunami early warning system that can be used to protect critical infrastructure and also to save lives. And I need to point out that you mentioned not just a matter of science and technology, but scientists needs to collaborate with decision makers, engineers, and also the local people. And you also mentioned that we need to prepare for an unexpected events, just like the one that we had after during the Anak Krakatau tsunami. Professor Kanamori, do you still have time for one or two questions?
Oh, yes.
Should be okay, yeah. Okay. Um, maybe you still remembers that we already sent several questions to you. I'm going to read the first one. The first question is, based on scientific findings from 1960s to this date, how do you think the progress of the earthquake predictions? Do you have any? What is your positions in of earthquake?
Okay. I couldn't hear the last portion. Something happened in audio.
Okay.
I think I understood your question, but toward the end, I couldn't hear.
Yes.
Did you
The
change
question
something?
is, yes. The question is, what do you think
Okay, I
about
understand that.
the progress of the
Prediction.
earthquake predictions? Yes.
Okay. Well, this is a big question. I can spend a few hours discussing this one. Firstly, when we talk about prediction, most people think prediction in very short term and very accurate. If we say probability is 0.01%, won't make any sense. So it's very difficult from a scientific point of view to make very precise prediction most people would expect. The reason is earthquake process is essentially a fracture process that involves many, many parameters. We call it a stochastic process, so that it's very difficult. Also, stress accumulation process in the earth is a long-term process. It takes 100 years, 1,000 years, even millions of years to accumulate enough stress to produce an earthquake. But what people are interested in is not that. They are interested in earthquake, some process with a time scale of a few seconds to a few minutes. And this is very difficult. We can understand the process over long term. However, it's very difficult to make prediction on short term. It's more like weather prediction. You think weather forecast is getting very good. It is. However, the whole thing has relatively short time scale. You can monitor typhoon over a week or so. However, it would be very difficult to make prediction regarding short-term process. For example, when a raindrop will start pouring within a matter of few seconds, I don't think we can predict it. Even if you can predict typhoon is coming, but you can never tell exactly what time fast rain will start. This is the same problem. In case of earthquake, process takes a long time, 1,000 years. Then you are interested in what will happen in a matter of few seconds. So that's why ordinary prediction, or the prediction the public would perceive it as prediction, is very difficult. However, prediction and hazard mitigation are different issues. It's very difficult to predict. So you might ask, what is good of science? You are doing something useless. Well, maybe. However, prediction and hazard mitigation are very different. We can make good progress in hazard mitigation by using advanced technology. But in order to do that, you need to understand the long-term process. That's where science plays a very important role. So my answer is, it's difficult to make prediction in the way people would expect. However, on the basis of the science we have developed for the last century or so, we can make much better use of it by combining it with advanced technology. As I showed you, seismology has advanced tremendously in that area. So we have to work together to make it work. Is that okay?
Okay. Thank you very much for your answer. Okay, so we need really to differentiate between predictions and mitigation, and the short-term predictions with the long-term predictions. And then, can we continue to the second questions, Professor Kanamori? The second questions is related with the slow tsunami earthquakes. can we predict which subduction zone can produce the slow tsunami-genic earthquakes, similar to what happens in Pangandaran 2006, Mentawai 2010? Is there any special characteristic of the subduction zone that can produce the slow tsunami-genic earthquakes?
Okay. Our experience is still very short, only 50 years or 100 years. So I don't think I can answer for certain. But my impression is tsunami earthquakes can happen at any seismogenic subduction zones. Anything like Sumatra, Chile, Alaska, Japan, any place it can happen. However, there is some difference. When it at a place where really big megathrust earthquake happened, like 2011 Tohoku, 2004 Sumatra, if that big earthquake happened, maybe at the same time tsunami earthquake is happening. A tsunami earthquake means a slip near the trench, and there is a slip near the trench. But at the same time, there was a big slip at some deeper portion simultaneously. So you cannot recognize the slip at the trench as such. All happen together. So you cannot separate it. So that's sometimes people say tsunami earthquakes happen only place where we don't have big megathrust. I don't think that's right. I mean, tsunami earthquake is happening everywhere, but when it happens together with big megathrust events like 2004, we cannot recognize it as such. But there is one. And 2011 Tohoku earthquake has some tsunami earthquake characteristic. On the other hand, like 2007 Sumatra earthquake is a tsunami earthquake because the slip at the deeper portion is relatively small compared with the slip at trench. On the other hand, 2005 Nias earthquake is probably not a tsunami earthquake because slip at large depths was very large, but slip at shallow depths was relatively small. And actually, large slip happened in the shallow part in 2007. So one idea is maybe shallow part slipped in 2007. So that's a reason why it didn't slip during the time of 2005. Oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. When I said 2007, that means 1907.
1907,
right?
the Sumatra, yeah.
Okay. So that part slipped in 1907. And 2005 Nias earthquake, it can't slip because it had already slipped. So that's one interpretation. So to answer your question, basically my feeling is slow tsunami-genic earthquake is a tsunami earthquake. I'm looking at your question. Slow tsunami-genic earthquake is what we call tsunami earthquake. It can happen any seismogenic subduction zones, but at some places it's difficult to recognize as such. And the question is whether tsunami earthquakes can happen at mostly aseismic subduction zones, like the Marianas, that subduction zone, but it hasn't produced really big earthquakes in the recent history. And there's a big debate whether it will never produce big earthquakes or it hasn't happened yet. Well, that's a good question. We don't know the answer.
Okay, thank you very much, Kanamori Sensei. So basically, tsunami earthquakes.
Can you speak up again?
Okay. Thank you for your answer, Kanamori Sensei.
Okay.
We still have 12 minutes.
Sure.
Can we invite the next questions?
Sure.
Okay. The next question is, what is the reasons that the short periods amplitudes of the tsunami earthquakes is much smaller as compared to the regular earthquakes?
Compared to what earthquake?
regular earthquakes.
Oh, okay. Well, that's the whole point. It's basically slip is very slow. So if something slips slowly, the displacement can be very large, but noise can be small, right? If you have two blocks, and if you slide one block against the other, if you slip it slowly, the displacement can be very large, but it won't produce big noise. But if you move it very fast, for the same amount of displacement, it makes bigger noise. That's exactly what happens. In case of tsunami earthquake, speed is probably 1/3 of a regular earthquake or something, or even less. But the amount of displacement can be fairly large.
Okay, so it is the whole point about the slow earthquakes, because the earthquakes because the rupture process is very slow, then the short periods wave is very smaller.
Mm-hmm.
Ibu Rahma, is there any other questions for Professor Kanamori? I believe there are several.
Yes, actually, there is also another question.
Can you speak up somehow? It's very difficult to hear.
Yeah, there is another question.
Sure.
Yeah, and I will put it in the slide. Please wait. Okay, here is the next question.
Okay, Bu Rahma, could you please make the slides bigger? Okay. The question is, can the type of tsunami earthquakes be seen from the slip magnitudes? So can we define that this earthquake is tsunami earthquakes or not tsunami earthquakes from the magnitude of the slip only?
Okay, to the first order, if you look at the total amount of displacement and the area, of course, let's suppose area is given. If the total amount of slip is the same, MW would be about the same. Okay. However, if it slips, that amount of slip in a shorter time, that means the speed is faster. MW would be still the same, but MB would be different because it moves faster, makes more noise in a way. So by measuring magnitude at two different periods, you can tell to some extent what the difference is.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Professor Kanamori. Yes, Ibu Rahma, could you please read the next questions?
Yes, so the next questions is actually from the Ministry of Spatial Planning, is how to protect existing development from tsunami losses through redevelopment, retrofit, and...
Some question here? I guess. It's very hard for me to hear. I don't know.
Okay, please wait. I will put it in the
Okay.
slide. Yeah.
If you can display your question here, it's easier for me to understand.
I will. This is, so I will put two questions at once. Okay, can you see?
Okay.
Okay, there are two questions. The first question is how to protect existing development from tsunami losses through redevelopment, retrofit, and land use reuse planning. What should be the main considerations?
Okay, well, this is also a very difficult question because there are many differences depending upon where you are. For example, well, if it's a very flat place like Sendai Plain during 2011, it's very difficult to evacuate. It's so flat. There are no hills or no mountains. But in the place where there are mountains and local small mountains, higher lands, it's very easy to evacuate there. So just to establish evacuation route, that will be very helpful. And also, there is a concept of vertical evacuation. That means to build some structure, sturdy structure on the beach, for example, so that people can go up there. Because in case of tsunami, if you survive for, say, a few hours, at least there will be time to escape to a safer place. Or the temporary shelter, man-made structure, can be very useful. So there are a lot of different things depending upon the environment. Of course, walls are or another thing, but it depends upon whether people really they can live behind the wall or not. Some fishermen may not like to live behind the wall because it's inconvenient. So in that case, walls may not be very effective. But certainly, these are all these should be considered by looking at lots of different things. Okay, the next one is what are the chances of a tsunami?
The chance.
Well, yes, there are a lot of places where you can expect 2006 type tsunami because there are lots of subduction zones. And even if in the past, there were not very big megathrust type events, but 7.8 or so is not 7.6, 7.8 event is not a large event by itself. And there are many places where that kind of event happens. And maybe the structure in the trench can be very similar to that in the source area of 2006. So there are just probabilities very high, like in Peru, Kuril Island, even in Japan. So you really have to worry about this, and we can take the lessons from the 2006 event very seriously.
Okay, thank you, Kanamori Sensei.
Okay.
I think we still have one last question,
Yeah.
Professor Kanamori. Can you read the questions?
Yes, I can. Yes. Well, of course, I mean, if you can determine more accurately, it's better. But in case of tsunami, it's not coming from a point. When you talk about hypocenter, it's a point. So it's not particularly relevant. More relevant thing is over what area the rupture happened. And of course, seismology is developing, improving, so that we can determine the size of the rupture area reasonably well. But still, it's not easy, actually. So it's very important to determine not hypocenter, not just the depth. Even if the initial depth is large, if it ruptured to shallow depths, it can be very serious. So waveform inversion can be used very effectively for determination of the mechanism, and also to some extent, it's useful for determination of the effective depth. But actually, recent progress is to use seismic information like high frequency energy, that phi parameter I mentioned, and also Professor Lei's group is trying to use CODA coda is a wave following P waves to see whether rupture reached the surface or not. Because if the rupture propagated towards the ocean floor, it will produce water waves. Water waves mean water bounce. P waves going up and down between the ocean surface and bottom. So it produces lots of reverberations in the waveform. So he thinks by using that information, we can tell whether the rupture extended to the surface or not. That's an important parameter. So they're trying to improve the technology.
Okay, thank you, Kanamori Sensei.
Okay.
I think we already come to the end of our webinars. As we promised, we need to finish at 11:15, and then and to all participants, thank you for your patience for joining these webinars until almost midnight, and also thank you for Professor Kanamori. And I'm very sorry, due to the time limitations, not all questions can be discussed during these webinars. We will have the third seminar. We will have the third webinars. After these webinars, we are going to invite another prominent speakers. Ibu Rahma, if you have any other informations, please share with us. Again, thank you, Professor Kanamori, for your time. Please, Ibu Rahma.
You're welcome. Good.
Yes,
I'm
thank
sorry
you very
that
much.
you couldn't see me. I'm still alive.
Yes.
We really wanted to see you, but it's no problem. You gave a very
I don't know, when we
nice-
tried this at home, it worked okay. So something must be different. I don't know why.
Yes, it's okay.
Okay.
You gave a very wonderful talk, and I think this 14 years of Tsunami Pangandaran provide us an insight on how science can develop from the technology and how technology can also contribute to science. And it will be our homework to live with this kind of phenomena. And I think your knowledge is valuable for us in Indonesia and for future better mitigation and for better understanding of science and technology in saving more lives. So thank you again very much, Prof. Kanamori. You always inspired everyone since first I met you in Nagoya University. And I think many from us here also have met you in Japan that study earthquakes. And I hope we can also follow your path until your age. You are still healthy and doing research. So I hope that we can also do the same thing as you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you,
Good.
everyone. Thank
I
you.
will send you a PowerPoint file.
Okay.
I will send you the PowerPoint file. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
So we will distribute your PowerPoint files, your PDF files to the participants today. And thank you again very much, Prof. Kanamori.
Okay.
Thank you very much for everyone. Terima kasih banyak semua yang sudah hadir pada malam hari ini. Jam 8 sampai jam setengah 10 waktu California. Di sini jam 10 malam sampai jam setengah 12 malam waktu Indonesia. Mudah-mudahan acara tadi bermanfaat. Nanti akan kami kirimkan materi ke email masing-masing. Terima kasih. Prof. Ilik, terima kasih banyak. Pak
Terima
Iwan,
kasih.
Pak Gegar, Ketua IATSI, terima kasih banyak.
Bisa kirim sesuatu ke Kanamori Sensei?